All right, so welcome to our GovTalks focusing on data. I see some familiar faces here. Some of you have been here for the previous GovTalks. And the way we like doing it is we focus on one thing for a certain event. And this talk is all about data. Now, all the data is not something that is new for us. We would like to talk about a certain aspect of what we can do with data and what the opportunities are and what other people are doing already that we could be doing. I also have some GeorgiaGov t-shirts to give out, so I would love for this to be an interactive session. All right, so a quick pop quiz before we start. We all know data, we use the term data a lot, but data by itself is a plural term. Even though we say, yes, this data set, data by itself is a plural term. Anybody knows the singular? I heard Joe first. I heard more, but since you raised your hand and you had the right answer, there you go, sir. A GeorgiaGov t-shirt. No, we take it back if you leave. All right, so when we talk about data, the biggest part of data that we really are talking about is the information that we get from that data, right? Because data by itself really doesn't mean anything unless we understand what it says, what it actually conveys. If we were to understand it, it's always better to understand the way we understand best. And somewhere in our grown-up years, we tend to forget that we are all very visual learners. And this actually, kind of goes back to when we were forming language, we were forming our means of communication, that we resorted to visual clues to communicate with each other. Granted, we weren't talking data sets and sophisticated network environments back in these days. And as our communication grew and progressed to a little complex level, we found our ways to communicate accordingly by then moving on to words and numbers and anything that describes what we want to say best, right? But then slowly, the comprehension of the message started going down, and we kind of lost sight of what really is effective communication. We started throwing up numbers, we started throwing up data up, or printing them or up on websites where, okay, somebody can go through these series of rows and columns and try and make sense of data or the information. But then at some point, we have to kind of go back and realize, is that the best way we are communicating? If we truly calculate the amount of information and messages that we are exposed to, and any wild guess, there's no t-shirt for this, but any wild guess, how many messages we are exposed to in a given day. And it could be a combination of visual messages, verbal, whatever it is.
370.
Joe has done his homework. All right. We are exposed to about 2,000 messages, but we are not engaged with those 2,000 messages. We can only register up to about 370 of those messages, just register, not even process, okay? Unless we are truly focusing on something, only then we start the processing power. We just do not have that level of processing power to get all these messages processed. So imagine someone standing at Times Square, right? So much of a data overload on us. information overload on us. One of the things that's unique about us, right, is that our brain literally spends about 50% of its processing power on visual information. Like, of all the sensory inputs that we get, the brain focuses more on the processing visual information, and the rest of the sensory touches come after. Our eyes literally have, the most important job to kind of send all that information. So it's very important to kind of communicate such that when someone's looking at what you're trying to communicate, they can understand it real quick. Because 2-second rule, right? If you don't engage them in the first 2 seconds, people move on. So when we say data, right, it's a very unhuman kind of presence, where data by itself doesn't mean anything. I mean, honestly, I just put data in Google search, and this is what came up for images. Means nothing at the first glance. It only starts meaning something when we try to understand it. What is that data trying to tell us? So let's take one of these slides. Okay? Clearly we see there are these bunch of numbers up there. At this point, if we just look at it from a surface value, we don't really tell anything what it's about. Further simplify it, and us trying to make some sense out of it, let me show you this, and let me kind of, have a purpose for what we're trying to do with this data. If I tell you in the next 5 seconds, can you count the number 9, how many times it's repeated? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How many 9s? I heard 9. Who said 10? Okay, I'm not going to throw it to you. Can you please give it to me? All right, so one person, said 10. That's true. Because it's kind of hard to make sure we quickly glance at everything. But if I were to show you this, you probably would save half the amount of time in counting the number 9s. Which is fine, because what we're trying to do is we are just trying to visualize it a little better. We're trying to present it a little better for you. When I say visualizing it, I'm not actually saying just go and change color, but it's like one of the aspects of what we can do with the data to make sure that we convey, this otherwise monolithic looking, intimidating piece of information. Now we have, as designers, as communicators, figured out various ways to make sure that information is visualized to the point where people can consume it well, right? It's no coincidence that we use a certain website or an app, and we just like it, right? We just love the way it's designed. We just love the way the interaction happens. It's not an accident. It's designed accordingly. There's science behind it. There are certain principles of proximity, continuation, closure, where you have to look at it from a design principle. Same thing happens when you're trying to present information through form of data. So how do we visualize it? Again, visualizing data is not new. We all have been doing it in the past. Maybe we just not realize that we are doing it under that title of information visualization or data visualization. I don't think there's anybody in this room who has not used the good old bar graph, right? The bar chart. Of course not. It's a very easy, universally accepted way of showing data, especially when you just have maybe 2 variables to show. In this case, the kind of fruits and the pounds of fruit sold, right? So clearly we see grape wins, and lime has some catching up to do. We don't have to take time to process through numbers and through labels. We also have line graphs. We have used them in the past. It's a lot easier when we are looking at multiple variables of the same kind, right? It's just easier to consume. We have timeline. For those of you who have seen information graphics, timeline has been used a lot, where you have to show some information based on chronological order. Then we have scatter plots, another very simple, clean way of just plotting things across two sets of variables. Bubble charts, and this is kind of where now we are getting more into a little kind of sophisticated visualization, because this is relatively newer. We knew until about scatter plots, but what the bubble charts did now, it added that extra aspect of adding color and size. So suddenly you can have some differentiation between, okay, those red bubbles mean something, the green ones mean something. It's actually, similar data, but at least it has some opportunity for us to add more context compared to the scatter plots. And then of course the good old pie chart, right? We have seen a lot of uses and abuses of this pie chart where people have used it at an angle to kind of prove their point. And I don't want to get into the statistics aspect of this, but what I want to say is there are ways to visualize data that we have been using in the past, knowingly, unknowingly. But now with newer technology, what we can do is now we can get the user in control. So far, we have been doing it before the fact and just presenting it as a visualization. But now with data being connected and being updated, the user themselves can actually decide, okay, how about I use this combination? How does the graph change? There's a lot of opportunity here where we can engage our users. So again, going back to this, anything's better than presenting data the way this is presented. All right, so here's one visualization. This is a data set. And this was put together by two data scientists, David McCandless and Lee Byron. And as you can see, this data set is set across a timeline. It has two peaks, one right around early March, late February, and one right around early December, late November. It has a pretty flat plateau around the summer months, but if you can zoom in here, you can probably see these micro patterns that it has a peak every Monday and it tapers down through the weeks. What could this be? Any guesses? I'm sorry? Tax season, call center activity. Okay. What else? Just take any guess. Vacation.
Travel. Traffic.
Traffic just traffic overall. Okay. Okay. Sick days. All right. Yeah. That's close. All right. So let me tell you what this is. These are peak breakup times per Facebook status updates. So what these data scientists did was they scraped through 10,000 status updates that had the keyword breakup or anything that suggests somebody had broken up. And as you can predict, right? I mean, right around after Valentine's Day, people want to just kind of clear out before spring break. Monday is typically people coming out of a rough weekend. Summers are pretty flat, but right before the holidays, and as you can see, the dip, like the lowest point is like Christmas Day. I mean, who breaks up on Christmas, right? Interesting stats. It just kind of gives a good insight onto behavior. Now, what's the value of this? I'm sure they came up with something, right? There are going to be tons of antidepressant companies wanting this data, or chocolate companies, who knows. Point being is that once we look at the data from a macro perspective, it starts making sense. Then we can start looking at some behavior patterns. This is another data set visualized. And this actually was a project named Mountains Out of Molehills. And it visualizes global media panics. What are some of the stories the media panics about, and then they cover them. On the timeline, we have from the year starting 2000, all the way going until 2010. The height, essentially, is the number of stories covered in media, and the width is the length of how many days they kept covering it for. And this is what it was. The tallest was the swine flu back in 2008. Then we had the bird flu, SARS, and that gray peak that you see was the Y2K bug. It's pretty interesting, right? Like,
I thought it was presidential elections. Because that would have been 2004.
Right, that one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the panic aspect of it. But these little bumps down there, killer wasps. But as you can see, it's consistent. So maybe one time of the year, whenever that happens, there is a bump. It's fantastic, right? I mean, it's just amazing to see all this data visualized and then just getting a sense of, okay, well, this is what's happening in the media. So at some point, you can start predicting it. You can almost start predicting, well, if killer wasps make that much of a news every year, pretty sure next year that is going to be in news. So data can also now help us predict some things, what's coming our way. So we don't always have to be reactive. We can be a little more proactive by understanding how users, how consumers are using our data. Now, what happens when there is super complicated data, right? So far, all these visualizations have been created by using some of the other tools. You can put in a certain level of variables and it spins up this visualization for you. You can control how you want it to present. But sometimes we are dealing with a certain level of complexity in our data where you kind of have to put the whole project in a manual mode. And let me show you my favorite, right, as far as complex data is concerned. Anybody know what this is? For a few hands, yes. Amazing, amazing visualization for the amount of detail that has been covered in this chart. This has a total of maybe at least 6 data points. This is Napoleon's March to Moscow. All right, not to get too much in the history lesson here, but like in the early 1800s, probably 1812 or something, the Russian Tsar wasn't too pally with Napoleon. So Napoleon's like, all right, I'm going to come and get you. So they started out trying to conquer Moscow. And I want to see if the laser, yeah, there you go. This is the border of Russia and Poland. When Napoleon started here, he had an army of 440,000 people. It was August. As they started moving closer towards Moscow, a couple of things they didn't realize. One was how vast Russia was. Probably not good cartographers back then, right? So they just kept going and going. And as they were proceeding towards Moscow, the winters started kicking in. And they just did not realize what Russians' winters look like. One of the tactic, I guess, the Russian army did was they just kept going back and just kept sucking them in because they knew we can sustain this winter, we're used to it, these guys cannot. And as you can see, this broad, pale yellow line keeps tapering down. Because as they start losing soldiers, this line just gets narrower and narrower to the point when they reach Moscow, his army was down to 100,000. All right, they take Moscow, quickly realize not worth it, too cold. Decide to turn around and go back. So the black line is their march back to the border. And as you can see, it's just insane by the time. So the red line here is the temperature that keeps dropping in. This is 0. All right, so this is kind of freezing temperature. This is 30 degrees for us. And it just keeps dropping in. And as you can see, his army just going down in numbers. And there was a certain sect of, I guess, his army that ventured into the north and then decided, well, we're just going to join them back here. So as you can see, the line gets thicker here. But there is a river that they cross, which was like frozen by the time they reached here, which was, I guess, whatever, it was December or January. And as you can see, the line just shortens again. So by the time they reach the border back again, 10,000 soldiers. This was the biggest blow ever, right, to Napoleon, and probably like one of the biggest kind of reduction in forces historically. But this map, this diagram really captures all that information. Fantastic. The first one, geography. We can easily see this is the border, this is Moscow, and this is, they kind of have plotted some places how they went around. Then obviously the numbers, the line thickness, the color difference when they were marching towards Moscow, going back, the temperature, everything. Fantastic piece. So when sometimes we are, I guess, looking at dealing with data that's complicated, that is not as easy as just putting 2 or 3 variables together, especially when the interdependencies are pretty high, we can always switch to a manual mode, and we can always come up with something that makes sense for that particular instance. So how does that really translate to what we do, right? This is all awesome. I mean, the good news is that government has been doing a lot. Also good news is that government has a lot of data that we could be using it for various purposes. There are other states that are doing fantastic things. Georgia is doing fantastic with our data sets. We have John Martin from DNR here who will be speaking later, showing what DNR has been doing with their data sets, and it's really fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to John's talk. But just to kind of give you a glimpse of what other government organizations are doing at a state level, at a local level, this is what New York City is doing. They are using GIS mapping for informing their citizens about just the overall rising sea levels. So putting it on a certain timeline, this is what they'll be looking at if the ocean levels were to rise. So maybe in the next 100 or 200 years, this is where New York will be based on their prediction. It's an interactive map. I don't have the actual animation here, but it's definitely worth looking at. It's pretty scary. Massachusetts, when they rolled out their 311 app, it's essentially saying something, showing something. They were tracking where all it's been used, what people are reporting, so they can actually be more aware of having those help around these areas. We used some data to redesign GeorgiaGov. When our team was looking at redesigning GeorgiaGov, we looked at how people were using GeorgiaGov. So data doesn't really need to sit in a table form. We can kind of see, hey, okay, you know what? Most of the people were clicking here. These are 35% of clicks on the page. It was child support link. It was one link, child support services. But if that link is consuming less than 0.5% of the page real estate, then clearly there is some designing to do for us here. We need to make it more prominent. Same thing with search, same thing with some of the other things. A big chunk of section, which was the headlines, no one cared. Right? So guess what we did? Got it. So data really informs us to make these decisions, and technology enables it. But one thing I would say with technology is when you are looking at a data visualization project, the last thing you want to think about is technology. The first thing you want to think about is what information are you there to present? What is your strategy to engage your customers or your audience? How well do you know them? Are they tech savvy? What kind of devices they might be using, and what is the context? Are they going to be walking around the streets trying to consume or interact with that data set? Or are they going to be sitting on computers with like a large screen? Based on that, then you can kind of decide, okay, this is a simple interaction, this is a complex interaction, who's going to support it? Okay, we launched it, what's going to happen after that, right? All of these questions need to be answered before we pick any technology or any solution for actually making it happen. There are other instances like hackathons. There's a community. Every place that we live in, we have talented individuals. And Luigi hopefully will touch on this in his talk right after this, where communities come together and they try and help out, because end of the day, this is a civic issue, right? We have this information sitting there. We want to make it available. And if we don't have that, expertise in-house, let's ask for it. There are communities out there. There are developers. There are map experts. There are designers out there who can come together. They can work on things. And hackathons happen a lot. And we are lucky enough to have some major hackathon events going on around in Atlanta. We would love to have like a state data specific hackathon at some point. It would be amazing if interested agencies want to get together and we can talk about it. But Code of America is this national body, and they invested in Atlanta and created the Atlanta chapter, Code for Atlanta. Then we also have Random Hacks of Kindness and many other. I don't want to list all of them, but there are opportunities out there. If you know you have a data set sitting there, but don't know what to do with it, but it needs to open up, we can do that. So anyway, so the takeaways are, if you were to just leave right after the talk, please don't, stay through the day, but look for those opportunities. Keep looking for the opportunities because they are there. I refuse to believe that not a single agency today has no data opportunities. We all our work is really important. We all have some awesome responsibilities. If you see some raw data sitting in PDFs or Excel files that has been, kind of just the norm to give out, that's it. Start with that. Like, hey, how can I visualize this? Because anything's better than having data sit in a PDF document. Within your agency, advocate data visualization. Not everyone really is on the same page as us. So if you see an instance like, a PDF with a list of data, start talking about data visualization. But make sure while you do that, you focus on, what is the information you want to give out. And then you can find the right tools. And then end of the day, we all just want to make a difference, right? With whatever we are doing, managing content, managing data. We want to make sure our constituents are engaged with us, and we really want them to have a good web experience. So thank you so much, and I'm really hoping in the rest of the talks, we have a good, successful day.